Welcome to Module 8, that is Unique Traditional Practices, Applied Traditional Knowledge and Ayurveda. So, before going in detail, we will be knowing that what is traditional knowledge? What do you mean by traditional knowledge? So, India, with a total geographical area of 329 million hectares, is the second largest nation in Asia and seventh in the world. The great diversity of habitats owing to varied climates and altitudes endorsed India's rich and diverse flora. India is fortunately endowed with a wide range of agroclimatic conditions that support the growth of an equally diverse range of plant and animal species. But the loss of biodiversity is a serious problem of the country. Several species of the living organism are disappearing and biodiversity is more threatened now than at any point of time. It is generally believed that biodiversity is more threatened now than any time in the past. It is generally believed that deforestation is the main cause behind the current crisis and along with this global climate change. Shifting cultivation, soil erosion, unchecked expansion of urban areas, etc., are the main other causes of this problem. The current rate of extension demand in immediate concentrated efforts for conservation of biodiversity for future generations. Conservation of biodiversity could be accomplished using both in situ and ex situ methods. It has been well recognized that valuable and productive biological resources are crucial for sustainable economic development. The rural population always believes that biodiversity is important for their livelihood and survival. Protecting and conserving biodiversity is our own interest, and industries such as pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, pulp and paper, construction, agriculture, and agro industries. Horticulture and waste treatment are dependent on biological resources. Between 70 to 80% of the population in developing countries relies on plants as the only source of medicine. Now, talking about traditional knowledge system. So, ideas and inventions have been passed down for generation to generation with many communities since the time immemorial. Today's practice can be defined as a collective understanding of all inventions and developments that occurred over time and were then passed down as traditional knowledge. Long before the development of modern science, which is quite young, indigenous people have developed their ways of knowing how to survive and also ideas about the meanings, purposes, and values. It has become customary to refer to this kind of knowledge as indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge. What makes knowledge traditional is not an antiquity. Much traditional knowledge is not an ancient or inert but is a vital dynamic part of contemporary lives for many communities today. Traditional knowledge is being created every day and evolves as the individuals and communities respond to the challenges posed by their social environment. The ancient Sanskrit proverb emphasizes the importance and the power of knowledge. It is also emphasizes the importance of safeguarding of traditional knowledge. Traditionally, knowledge has been constituted, stored, and maintained in the framework of the oral culture. Traditional knowledge is crucial to a community's integrity. These knowledge systems are vital to people's livelihoods. However, the proceeds from these inventions rarely make their way back to the communities that created them. It is important to encourage indigenous peoples' right to preserve and protect their traditional knowledge. A major cause of traditional loss is a lack of record keeping. and it is well known in recent years. Indigenous peoples, local communities, and governments, mainly in developing countries, have demanded intellectual property, that is IP, protection for traditional forms of creativity and innovations, which under the conventional IP system, that is intellectual property system, are generally regarded as being in the public domain and thus free anyone to use. Indigenous peoples, local communities, and many countries reject a public domain status of traditional knowledge and TCE and argue that this opens up with them to unwanted misappropriation and misuse. Protection should principally benefit the holders of the knowledge, in particular the indigenous traditional communities and people that develop, maintain, and identify culturally with the traditional knowledge and seek to pass it on to the future generation, as well as recognized individuals within these communities and peoples. Traditional knowledge is addressed in the following international forums. Number one, the International Labour Organization, that is ILO, the United Nations Commissions on Human Rights, and the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Focus Issues, the World Intellectual Property Organization, that is WIPO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization, UNESCO, the World Trade Organization (WTO), the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development (UNCTAD), and many more. Among various international organizations and forums, the World Intellectual Property Organization has made a remarkable contribution to protecting traditional knowledge and traditional culture expressions. According to WIPO, traditional knowledge is a knowledge, know-how, skills, and practices that are developed, sustained, and passed on from generation to generation within a community, often forming part of its cultural or spiritual identity. WIPO currently uses the term traditional knowledge to refer or to tradition-based literary, artistic, or scientific works, performances, inventions, scientific discoveries, designs, marks, names, and symbols, and undisclosed information, and all other tradition-based innovations and creations resulting from intellectual activity in the industrial, scientific, literary, or artistic fields. Categories of traditional knowledge could include, but are not limited to, agricultural knowledge, scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, ecological knowledge, medicinal knowledge, including related medicines and remedies, biodiversity related knowledge, traditional cultural expressions in the form of music, dance, song, handicrafts, design, stories, and artwork, elements of languages such as names, geographical indications, and symbols, and movable cultural properties. Given the highly diverse and dynamic nature of traditional knowledge, it may not be possible to develop a singular and exclusive definition of the term. For some concepts, the term applied by holders of traditional knowledge in their native language has no correspondence in other languages because of the unique development of the concept in that tradition. Though there is not yet an accepted definition of traditional knowledge at the international level. Traditional knowledge can be defined in two ways. In general sense, it embraces the content of knowledge itself as traditional cultural expressions, including distinctive signs and symbols associated with traditional knowledge. In a narrow sense, it refers to knowledge resulting from intellectual activity in a traditional context and includes know-how, practices, skills, and innovations. Now, coming to the next slide, that is heritage and traditional knowledge. So, heritage and traditional knowledge. Heritage is everything that defines our distinct identity of our people. This is how bestowed on us by our ancestors and endowed to us by nature. It includes our social, political, cultural, and economic systems and institutions as well as our belief system, ethical and moral values, and our customary laws and norms. Heritage includes traditional knowledge, which is creative production of human thought and craftsmanship. Language, cultural expressions which are created, acquired, and inspired, such as songs, dances, stories, ceremonies, symbols, and designs, poetry, artwork, scientific, agricultural, technical, and economical or ecological knowledge and skills required to implement this knowledge and technologies. Heritage also includes what we inherit from the nature, such as the natural features in our territories and landscapes. Biodiversity, which consists of plants and animals and microorganisms and the various diverse ecosystem which we have nurtured and sustained. According to WIPO, is primarily concerned with protection in the IP sense, that is, protection against unauthorized copying, adaptation, and use of traditional knowledge by third parties. Two types of IP protection should be sought of: defensive protection and positive protection. So, talking about defensive protection, defensive protection aims to stop people outside the community from acquiring intellectual property rights over traditional knowledge. India, for example, has compiled a searchable database of traditional medicine, that is, traditional knowledge digital library, that can be used as evidence of prior art by patent examiners when assessing patent applications. Defensive strategies might also be used to protect scared cultural manifestations such as scared symbols or word from being registered or trademarks. Next, coming to positive protection. Positive protection is granting of rights that empower communities to promote their traditional knowledge, control its uses, and benefits from its commercial exploitation. Some uses of traditional knowledge can be protected through the existing intellectual property system, and several countries have also developed specific legislation. It involves the enactment of specific rules and regulations and laws, as well as to access the benefit sharing provisions, royalty payments, etc. The current intellectual property system, for the most part, ignores so-called traditional knowledge. The intellectual property system, which is based on Western conception of which we know very thing. Now coming to next slide, that is traditional knowledge and communities. So, talking about traditional knowledge and communities, biological resources and related traditional knowledge are often of great commercial value to business corporation in developing commercial products. Corporations often want to acquire IPRs related to biological resources and traditional knowledge as a very way of maximizing their income generation. Traditional communication or communities is a broad term that refers to the communities whose way of its life is largely shaped by generation of its ancestors. They are distinct from urban or fast-changing societies and lifestyles, maintaining a shared body of cultural, environmental, economic, and family customs that are based on traditional occupation, knowledge, values, and social hierarchies. Traditional community livelihoods are usually based on natural resources. Traditional communities could include farming or fishing communities, forest dwelling communities, indigenous people, nomadic communities, and etc. many more. Now, coming to next slide, that is importance of traditional knowledge. So, what is the importance of traditional knowledge? Traditional knowledge plays an important role in the conservation of biodiversity and its traditional uses. Indian system of medicine, Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani are part of the official healthcare system in India and depend on a diversity of biological resources and traditional knowledge. Farmers and livestock keepers have improved and nurtured diverse varieties of crops and domesticated animals over generations. This has been invaluable for the food security and providing clothing, healthcare, and shelter. Farmers all over the India, local communities have independently conserved wild areas, including natural ecosystems, sometimes deemed to be scared. Example, sacred groves, some thousands of years old, dedicated to a local day. Traditional knowledge is therefore very valuable in a range of sectors. Industries have often freely used traditional knowledge or for developing commercial products, usually without the consent of or without knowledging of the original holders of the knowledge. The conflict arises when such knowledge is commercially used without consent or when IPRs are and exclusive rights are claimed over such resources and knowledge. The Convention on Biological Diversity, that is CBD, is the principal international instrument which explicitly acknowledges the role of traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices of indigenous and local communities, tangible and visible traditional life, styles in biodiversity conservation and its sustainable development. The scope of the traditional knowledge covered by the Convention, however, is confined to genetic materials. It is a framework convention setting out general principles that the parties agree to be guided by the work towards in a long-term process. According to article of the convention, each contracting party, subject to its national legislation, is required to respect, preserve, and maintain knowledge, innovations, and practices of indigenous and local communities, tangible or visible lifestyles relevant for conservation and sustainable use of biological resources, and promote the wider application of such knowledge, innovations, and practices with the approval and involvement of their holders, and also encourage the equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of such knowledge, innovations, and practices. Now coming to next slide, that is biopiracy. Biopiracy is a violation of the rights of traditional communities over their biological resources and related knowledge. The implications of biopiracy are economic as well as ethical. Obtaining IPRs using usually patents or plant breeders' right to gain monopoly control over biological resources, related traditional knowledge, or commercial products based on these resources or knowledge without the consent of or any benefits going to the original holders of the resource knowledge. The original holders of biological resource and related traditional knowledge do not get any share in the profits made from the commercializing the products based on their resources or knowledge. They also do not get any recognition for nurturing and developing the resources or knowledge in the first place. Once an IPR is acquired by the biopirate, the original holders of a biological resource or related traditional knowledge are barred from making any commercial use of IPR protected knowledge or resource. This could lead to a situation where, for example, a community is not allowed to sell an indigenous product that is covered by an IPR. The IPR holder dictates the terms of use of the IPR protected resource or knowledge, which could mean that the traditional communities who are the original holder could lose access to or control over their resources or knowledge. The investigation of biological resources for new commercial uses has been an inherent part of global economic and social development. The problem arises when bioprospecting leads to biopiracy or environmentally unsustainable practices such as collecting huge quantities of sample from an area. The term bioprospective has acquired strong negative connotation and is often used in a sense that implies that bioprospecting necessarily leads to biopiracy. Some traditional communities may also find bioprospective offensive because it seeks to commercially exploit biological resources and related traditional knowledge, which are sacred or which support their livelihoods. Now, coming to the next slide, that is traditional communities and vulnerability to biopiracy. Traditional communities are especially vulnerable to biopiracy because traditional communities do not consider their seed, crop, and livestock, varieties, forest and marine sources, and related knowledge as private property, but as communal property. God-given or passed down by a generation of their ancestors who have nurtured and developed the natural resources and related knowledge. For most traditional communities, the concept of private ownership of resource like a seed variety is completely alien, thus hindering a full appreciation of the threats and implications of an IPR regime. Traditional communities are vulnerable because of social hierarchies and low level of awareness and literacy. There is an ignorance of the law and usual existing IPR regime, and even if the law is known, traditional community members are usually powerless to demand its enforcement to prevent biopiracy or get some form of benefit sharing argument. Due to factors such as illiteracy, low social status, and lack of financial resources, the norms and principles of international IPR regimes have developed in a way that enhance the vulnerability of the traditional communities to biopiracy. Now, coming to the next slide, that is traditional knowledge and agriculture. Traditional knowledge transforms biodiversity into bioresources. Biodiversity and associated traditional knowledge are as an integral strength of today's developing countries, particularly in the areas of agriculture and horticulture. It holds great potential all over the world that is increasingly being sensitized to traditional knowledge. Indigenous men and women over generation have bred races of several food, cash crops, and horticultural crops out of wild plants of the forest called land races or local or indigenous varieties, and these are the basic foundations of modern plant breeding and global food security. Indigenous farming communities have also identified and managed a series of genes through selection and crossbreeding. These genes have potential traits of pest and diseases resistance, drought tolerance, high salt tolerance, cold tolerance, and tolerance to waterlogging, etc. To develop a crop that can withstand global warming and climate changes across agricultural zones. International scientists visit tropical regions for crop varieties that are drought tolerant and resistant, and for this purpose, they depend largely on traditional knowledge and local farmers. Breeding and selection process with local varieties, they will be able to develop a potential high yielding crop variety with combination traits for tolerance and drought or salinity, or resistance to pests and diseases. Now coming to the next slide, that is traditional knowledge and healthcare. Traditional knowledge is a valuable system continuously developed over generations by tribal and rural communities in different parts of the world and transmitted from one generation to next generation in oral form. The knowledge covers primarily on human and animal health. Besides, the traditional knowledge pertains to building of houses, food and agriculture, textiles, handicrafts, and soil conservation, moisture conservation, and many other natural resources management. In India, a well-developed system known as using plants for health flourished in the Vedic period around 3000 BC. Due to its strong cultural roots, the Indian systems of medicine is still vibrant and dynamic and central core for providing the health, security, and livelihood needs of the bulk of India's people, particularly the rural and the tribal communities. According to the World Health Organization, estimates around 80% of the world's population have used indigenous system of healthcare at one time or the other. In recent years, herbal or alternative medicines based on traditional knowledge have gained acceptance across the world. Indian systems of medicines are the traditional system of healthcare practiced in India over several centuries and are still a viable living tradition of our people. Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, Yoga, Naturopathy are the main traditional systems, but if we will not be surprisingly to find the roots of other alternative therapies like aroma, music, photo, leech, etc. in traditional health care system practiced in India. Now coming to the next slide, that is international trade of medicinal plants and herbal medicines. Annual international trade in medicinal and aromatic plant material is 4 lakh to valued at 1.1 to 1.3 billion US dollar in 1997. The figure is an increase of one third compared to 1995. Now this would have increased considerably. China is the leading country with an export of botanical drugs around 1,40,000 tonnes per year. India ranks second in export in terms of volume, around 35,700 tonnes per year, but only in sixth position in terms of values of around 516,100,000 US dollars. International. Now for herbal medicine, annual global sales of medicinal products derived from the genetic resources is around 700 billion US dollar. The global market for herbal medicine alone has reached 43 billion US dollar with an annual growth rate between 5 and 15%. It is expected to reach 5 trillion US dollar by 2002. China, the leader in the field, generated an income of about 5 billion US dollar in 1999 from the international market, and the global exports are around 10 billion US dollars, which means China could snatch 50% of global exports. Accordingly to WHO estimates, the European markets in 1999 was calculated to be 1.9 billion US dollar, in which Germany accounts for 38%, France for 21%, and UK for 12%. The Worldwide Fund for Nature statistics have shown in the Europe that the European Union imported over 1 lakh tons of plant material in 1990, of which 12% were for India. Now coming to the next slide, that is protection of traditional knowledge. So before that, I would like to tell about something of biodiversity and bioprospecting. Bioprospecting is the exploration of biodiversity for commercial, valuable biological and genetical resources. The term especially refers to the investigation of biological resources for new commercial uses. A range of commercial sectors base their activities on bioprospecting, such as the pharmaceutical, biotechnology, seed and crop, horticulture, cosmetics, and food sectors. Bioprospectors source their material in two ways. In addition to biological resources, related traditional knowledge can be also commercially lucrative. In a major global study in 1985, a total of 122 plant-derived pure compounds were identified as being in use as drug around the world. The medicinal use of 80% of these compounds correlated with traditional medicinal use. It was also discovered that the compounds were derived from only 94 species of plants. Given that the approximately 250,000 higher plant species exist, it is likely that there are many more medicinal use of plants remaining to be discovered. It is believed that many scientists and the most effective way to do so would be to screen plants on the basis of traditional medicinal use. However, this remains a subject of debate, and it is argued that a random approach to plant screening and drug discovery is as effective as an approach based on traditional knowledge. Traditional knowledge is used in different ways by different commercial sectors. It can be used to guide initial discovery and identify new leads, or to guide subsequent research after a useful compound has been identified. Traditional knowledge is usually acquired through published academic research or other secondary resources rather than directly through field studies. Now, coming to the protection of traditional knowledge. The protection of traditional knowledge, innovations, and practices of indigenous and local communities has received increasing international attention since the adoption of CBD in 1992. It is now a well-documented fact that traditional knowledge plays an important role in the global economy and is valuable not only to those who depend on it in their daily lives, but also to modern industry and agriculture. Next, I would like to say about how to protect it, that there are no reliable estimates of the total contribution of traditional knowledge associates with traditional crop varieties to the global economy, but the contribution of traditional knowledge in the development and growth of pharmaceutical and biotechnology based industries are widely reported. A recent study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has outlined the relative importance of biotechnology patent activity by concluding that the absolute number of biotechnology patents issued by the United States Patent Office and the European Patent Office has grown substantially in comparison with the total number of patents. Traditional knowledge associated with a biological resource is an intangible component of the resource itself. Traditional knowledge has the potential of being translated into commercial benefits by providing valuable leads for the development of useful products and processes. The valuable leads provided by traditional knowledge save time, money, and investment of the modern biotech firms into any research and product development. It is estimated that a hit rate of 80% or more can be achieved in developing medicinal drugs where the screening of plants is limited to species used by indigenous communities. The issue of protection and preservation of traditional knowledge at the international level has been brought to the forefront at the instance of developing countries because of different concerns and perspectives. A large number of countries rich in genetic resources and the traditional knowledge and folklore believe that the traditional communities have been deprived of the benefits from the use of their knowledge. Innovations and practices which have been monopolized and used by others mainly by major companies without their authorization and without acknowledging or rewarding them for their knowledge. Consequently, there is a perceivable asymmetry between the benefits obtained by the companies, that commercial exploitation of this knowledge, and the lack of benefits for its true holders. Developed countries have a moral obligations to ensure that the indigenous or local peoples receive a fair and equitable share of benefits arising out of the use of their traditional knowledge and the commercialization of genetic resources. Moreover, if the knowledge assets of developed countries are to be protected by means of an international agreement, such as the TRIPS agreement, it is only fair, equitable that the knowledge assets of developing countries also be similarly protected in a similar way. It is indeed the responsibility of the international community to create an egalitarian system for the availability, acquisition, maintenance, and enforcement of the intellectual property rights. An international regime would give holders of traditional control over the use of their knowledge assets and the capacity to ensure that they are not exploited commercially. There has been an increased number of reported cases of misappropriation and commercial exploitation of this knowledge under the patents and other IPRs. In many of these cases, claims in the patents on plants and their genetic resources are not fundamentally different from the practices applied by the traditional communities in the utilization of these plants as food, cosmetics, or traditional medicines. Some of these cases have been successfully challenged, such as in the case of neem and turmeric. The raises are important issue of the legal protection of our traditional knowledge. The protection of traditional knowledge is important for the conservation and sustainable development of the environment, as much as of the world crop diversity has been conserved and preserved by the indigenous or local peoples, which has helped in the protection and conservation of biodiversity. Their knowledge is central to the conservation and preservation of GRs and the other bioresources. Most of the communities live in the areas where the vast majority of the world's plant genetic resources are found. There is also the danger that the biological resources increasingly subject to IPRs and patents and are likely to plug to extinction, which raises concerns and over their exhaustibility and loss of habitat besides the loss of lifestyles and livelihoods to indigenous communities that they have nurtured and used these resources for generations. This may also ultimately would affect food security. International recognition and protection of traditional knowledge would help in the protection or conservation of the environment and in the management of biodiversity. The movement of traditional communities from their natural habitat and their increasing attraction with modern society has also raised concern about the protection of traditional knowledge, which will lead to its extinction, as well as will affect the biodiversity. Lack of motivation in the younger generation to learn the traditions in other reasons for the protection and of traditional knowledge. There is a fear that the traditional knowledge will suffer extinction with the death of the elders of the community. Traditional knowledge is generally viewed as being inferior since it does not conform to the expected scientific methods of learning in the context of the modern approach of science. Only by concerted efforts to protect it and accord it due to respect that can the trend be stopped. There is also a need to enable these communities to harness traditional knowledge for the economic uplift and growth. In India, there is an example of benefit sharing in the case of Arogya Pacha during an ethnobotanical expedition in the tribal region of the Western Ghats in the state of Kerala. A team of scientists encountered the Kani practice of eating seeds of the wild plant, and this gave them energy. The Kani tribe has used the plant, locally called Arogya Pacha, for several years to help them through periods of physical exertion. Arogya Pacha was investigated, and finally a standardized drug based on the Kani knowledge of Arogya Pacha was developed. The drug, called Jeevani, was released for commercial production in 1995. While transferring the technology for the production of the drugs to a pharmaceutical firm, the Tropical Botanic Garden and Research Institute agreed to share the license fee on a 50-50 basis. In addition to this, 2% of the royalties from sales is to go to the tribal community. The Kanis have since been helped to register a trust. This trust is fully owned and managed by the Kani tribe. About 60% of the 2000 Kani families of Kerala are now members of this trust. According to the trust rule, the license fee and the royalties received on account of the drug Jeevani will be in the form of the fixed asset of the trust, and only the interest accrued from this amount can be used by the Kanis for the welfare activities. This model was developed over a period of 12 years from 1987 to 1999 in consultation with the Kani tribe. We have many protection for Indian knowledge in Indian acts. Some of the India's new laws have implication for Indian knowledge and bioresources. The following are the given: the Geographical Indication of Goods, that is Registration and Protection Act in 1999, the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmer Rights Act, that is in 2001, the Biological Diversity Act, that is in 2002, and the Patent Second Amendment Act 2002. We have Traditional Knowledge Digital Library also. It is a collaborative project between the National Institute of Science, Communication and Information Resources, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, Ministry of Science and Technology, and Department of Ayush, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, which is being implemented at NISCARE. An interdisciplinary team of traditional medicine, Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, Yoga, experts, patent examiners, IT experts, scientists, and technical officers are involved in the creation of TKDL for Indian System for Medicine. The project TKDL involves documentation of the knowledge available in public domain on traditional knowledge from the existing literature related to Ayurveda. Unani and Siddha in digitized format in 5 international languages, which are English, German, French, Japanese, and Spanish. Traditional knowledge resource classification, an innovative structured classification system for the purpose of systematic arrangement, dissemination, and retrieval has been evolved for about 10,500 subgroups against one group in international patent classification related to medicinal plant. Now moving to the next slide, that is traditional medicine. So the Indian system for medicine, Ayurveda, which means TKDL, integrates widely scattered and distributed references on the traditional knowledge system in Ayurveda of India in a retrieval form. TKDL acts as a bridge between the traditional and modern knowledge system, a bridge between the knowledge contained in an old Sanskrit sloka and the computer screen of a patent examiner, thus breaks the language and format barriers of the prior art available in authoritative textbooks of Ayurveda in Hindi and Sanskrit. There are 36 formulations that are transcribed from 14 Ayurvedic texts and presented in the digital library are based on well-tested Ayurvedic principles. In fact, Ayurveda and Indian systems of medicine are formal system of traditional knowledge. There are 3,67,528 registered practitioners in Ayurveda, 41,221 in Unani, 12,915 in Siddha, and 388 in Naturopathy. And annually there are 7,070 graduates and 64 postgraduates in Ayurveda, 1280 graduates and 35 postgraduates in Unani, 150 graduates and 70 postgraduates in Siddha was trained professionally to take up the practice. Now coming to one by one, traditional medicine. Now the methodological criteria. So first is empirical basis. The Ayurvedic texts lay great store by empirical observation. The text detailed instructions about how to collect the data on drugs, on pathological systems, and even on the anatomy through dissection of corpuses. And the data accumulated on all these aspects in stupendous to take the case of data on drugs alone. Ayurvedic texts mention drugs of vegetable, animal, and mineral origin. The number of drugs plants mentioned in the three Samhitas, that is Charaka, Sushruta, and Ashtatanga Hridaya, is somewhere between 600 and 700. The number of Sanskrit names, excluding their derivatives, of vegetable drugs is about 1900. To this, it needs to be added that the medicinal works do not discuss plants as such. What this discuss instead are the efforts on our bodies of the different parts and products of the plants. As far as the drugs of animal origin are concerned, Charaka Samhita alone discusses 165 varieties of animals, enumerating the different animals' products used for medicinal purposes. It says in Shutra Siddhana, chapter 1, shloka 68 to 69, honey, milk, bile, fat, marrow, blood, flesh, excrement, urine, skin, semen, bones, sinews, horns, nails, hoofs, and many more are the substances used in medicine from the animal world again. Charaka Samhita mentions 64 main minerals used for drugs. If we add to this 600 to 700 drugs plants with their different parts forming different drugs, 165 varieties of animals again with different products and parts acting as different drugs, and 64 main minerals, the various pharmaceutical pharmacological preparation to which each of these drugs could be subjected, then one can have some idea of enormity of the pharmacopoeia on which Ayurvedic medicines are based. In fact, the Charaka Samhita itself speaks of 600 purgatives and 500 declensions, besides the 84 varieties of wines. The respect for empirical observation of the Ayurvedic physicians is so great, the Charaka Samhita states, the entire world is the teacher of the intelligent physician, as it is the foe of the fool. And both Charaka and Sushruta Samhitas declare no substance is found in the world which is without relevance for medicine. Now, talking about the theoretical framework to classify the empirical data. The Ayurvedic physicians are clearly aware of the need for a theoretical framework to understand the empirical data in order to go beyond more empiricism. They feel that something more than the mere knowledge of the substances is required for their purpose. This something is the intellectual discipline of the Ayurvedic physicians are clearly aware of the need for a theoretical framework to understand the empirical data in order to go beyond the mere empiricism. They feel that something more than the mere knowledge of substances is required for their purpose. This something is the intellectual discipline of Yukti. Hence they claim Yukti, the rational application, is the ultimate foundation of the therapeutic success. A physician accomplished in rational application is always superior to one with the mere empirical knowledge of the substances. No one can claim to have a perfect knowledge of the pharmacology by the mere acquaintance with the names or even forms of herbs. If one who knows the uses and actions of herbs, then based on the theoretical formulation, Ayurvedic physicians develop an elaborate theoretical framework to classify and understand that it may be called a pharmacologist and understand the diseases and to infer the ways of curing diseases. This is not the place to go into the details of the theoretical framework of Ayurveda. Suffice it to be said that framework established was elaborate enough to classify and understand the huge amount of data on drugs, diseases, diet, soil conditions, etc. that the physicians collected. Now, talking about basis of legitimization. In spite of the fact that the physicians laid so much stress upon a theoretical formulation of the problem of medicine, the physician always insisted that the final test of any hypothesis lay in practice. As Charaka Samhita states, Sutra Siddhana, chapter 1, shloka 134, he is the best physician who can in actual practice cure people of diseases. Or all this is what we prescribe because of all these are based on what we directly observe. Similarly, Shushuta states, a learned physician must never try to examine on grounds of pure logic the efficacy of the medicine, which is known by direct observation as having by nature a specific medicinal action. Thus, for example, even 1,000 logical grounds will not make the Ambastha group of drugs have a purgative function. We can similarly go on to describe the results of our assessments based on epistemological and sociological criteria. However, we do not wish to enter into the details of discussion here. Now, what are the differences? What are the comparisons between these modern sciences? So, I would like to highlight certain aspects of traditional knowledge system that makes it identifiable different from modern Western system. Some of them except aspects are the social organization of knowledge, the nature of the parameter used to build scientific theories, and the measurement, quantification, and achieving rigor. We would look into them in some detail since each of them has implications for how we comprehend and interact with this knowledge. The social organization of indigenous health traditions. The Indian subcontinent abounds as it were a variety and diversity of health traditions. We have with us what is perhaps the longest unbroken health traditions, which has not only a stream of practitioners, but also a textual and theoretical backing in terms of the Ayurvedic and Siddha systems of medicine. They have made their presence felt even outside the India as per our need. Or however, what is the most remarkable about the Indian medical tradition is that it prevails at two different levels, namely the classical system and the folk system. By the classical system, we refer to the codified systems such as Ayurveda, Siddha, and Unani traditions. They are characterized by institutionally trained practitioners, a body of text, and highly developed theories to develop support their practices. As against this, we also have a folk tradition or what we termed as the Lok Parampara, which is an oral tradition passed on from father to son or mother to daughter or daughter-in-law or from guru to sishya in tens and thousands of villages through the ages. The folk traditions are rich and diverse and include several practitioners as the following illustrations. So, individuals and families specializing in the treatment of specific diseases, for example, jaundice, asthma, knowledge of diagnostic procedures, knowledge of preventive measures, knowledge of adaptation of food and regime to suit the seasons, yoga, and other physical cultural practices at a preventive and promotive nature. Special areas such as cultural practices such as bone setting, Visha Chikitsa. Then next we have over 6 lakhs dayas, that is traditional birth attendants who perform home deliveries. The relationship between folk and tradition, classical tradition, is found to be symbiotic. There is a strong commonality of underlying theory and worldview expressed at the level of Panchamabhuta, commonality of underlying theory, theory of composition of matter, and Tridosha, theory of causation of disease. There is also a striking common ground between the technical terms that are used by the expert practitioners and what is known to the folk practitioners. The technical vocabulary such as Vata, Pitta, Kapha, Ushna, and the households. It is also interesting to see that what the classical text of Ayurveda says about the folk tradition. The Charaka Samhita states that the goat herds, shepherds, cow herds, and other forest dwellers know the drug by name and form. Similarly, Sushruta Samhita states that one can know about the drugs from the Kohed Thipavis hunters, those who live in the forest and those who live by eating roots and tubers. Now, I would like to sum up some aspects of the traditional Indian system of knowledge, especially theory constructions and its relation to popular knowledge. The main feature is that the theories do not employ a great degree of formalization in the sense of providing laws or rules that are absolute and can be blindly applied outside or irrespective of the context of their formulation. The terms and variables used in the theories and laws are closely related to actual observed phenomena or measured quantities, often bearing their refinements. This does not mean that the Oris lack rigor or precision or power. For example, the most rigorous and precise formulations and arguments in the area, such as logic or grammar or metaphysics, are carried in our tradition in Shastric Sanskrit, which is but a refinement of the natural language Sanskrit without recourse to any formal devices of abstraction. Thus, the laws, theories, and its terminology bear a very live and intimate relations to the popular mode of discourse on the subject and the folk knowledge of it. This point to a very important feature of our science and technology, namely that its knowledge, theories, and principles are meant to be reposed in a small number of experts, institutions, or texts, but are created and shared on a wide scale, even by the ordinary folk who are the day to day practitioners by the arts and sciences. In fact, though we have used the term folk knowledge to denote knowledge without any people for want of better term, its connotation is quite different in the modern text. In the modern Western view, Folklore is used to denote knowledge that prevails with the common people and gets propagated by oral tradition. This is as against classical or proper scientific knowledge, which uses its own terminology, theories, and abstractions and resides in a different body of people. The experts, but in our tradition, the kind of sharp qualitative frontiers of their discipline and the theories and the technical categories belong to their domain as well. If we consider an example, a highly developed branch of Indian science such as medicine, the basic theories at its foundation, such as the Panchabhuta theory of matter and the Tridosha theory of causation of disease, and its treatment are part of common knowledge of our people, and a number of technical terms such as Vata, Pitta, Kapha, Agni, Rasha, Ushna, Shita, Vira, etc. are all parts of the vocabulary of our households. The expert or specialist seems to play a very different kind of role here, namely that of systematizing the corpus of knowledge. For example, in a discussion about the role of grammarian, the famous grammarian Pantajali says, "He who has the use of pot goes to a potter's house and says, 'Make a pot.' I have to use it." But no one similarly goes to the grammarian and says, "Coil words, I shall make use of them." He thinks of objects and makes use of the words denoting them, the loka, that is, what prevails in the word as usage, is the authority for the use of words. Thus, there is no looking down upon the common folk or the lay practitioners. What is the nature of parameters used to build the scientific theories? It is widely believed and expressed that the tradition science in India has not developed over the last few centuries, and it is assigned, it is stagnated. As per one view, this has happened due to the disruption and disorganization of the Indian society during the colonial period, but as per yet another popular view, it is considered that there is an intrinsic problems with the Indian society and thinking which makes our knowledge repetitive and stale and accept authoritative pronouncement of masters and sages unquestioningly. What is seen as the manifestation of the tendency is the apparent consistency and lack of the change of the basic theories, which with traditional sciences to explain anything. For example, the traditional theory of composition of matter or cause of disease is developed to have remained more or less unchanged for a couple of millennia. This is in direct contrast to modern scientific theories, which on the face of it shows dramatically change and improvement. Early in the last century, Captain G, a modern trained physician who undertook a deep study of traditional knowledge of medicine, used an interesting analogy to understand this. The subject of etiology provides us with a striking illustration of this characteristics feature of Indian analytical thought. The causation of disease is by agencies outside of oneself is common ground between etiology of both Ayurveda and allopathy shows the characteristic features differentiating the two viewpoints. An analogy may perhaps serve a useful purpose in this context. Let us suppose we wish to classify the various inventions, and if we want to classify we may do it in two ways. In one way, we may classify the invention as those by either land or sea or air. In the other way, we may classify them as those by the Greeks, the Cynthians, the Mohammedans, the Europeans, and so on. The first classification is all these three models, singly or combined. This is equivalent to the Ayurvedic view, where all disease is symptoms of the patients. But the second classification is applicable only to the present and past and those given above. The list have to be added to, whereas in the first cast, a future invention will naturally go in under one or other of the three categories that have been laid down once for all and for all times as it were. Thus, we can see that even new conditions and diseases can indeed be dealt with the Ayurveda within the traditional framework because of the nature of parameters that are used to build their theories. This writer was present at a fascinating discussion in 1990s where a modern Ayurvedic physician from Pune analyzed blood cancer in patients using Ayurvedic theories a couple of millennia old and identified it to be but affecting the astha and maza tissues and severe depletion of dhatus. So what is the measurement and quantification achieving rigor? Assigning numerical values and making precise measurements is indeed a hallmark of the modern scientific method, not only in physical sciences, but also increasingly in the biological and even sciences. If it sometimes felt that the traditional sciences are not up to the mark, since we see to precise measurement of quantities in this sense, measurement, and quantification are indeed present in the traditional sciences, though they occur in a manner which is somewhat different from the modern notions of the matter. Most measurements in traditional medicine are by using units which are normalized to a given individual. For example, this means that while measuring the height of a person, body, or the length of its limb, it is expressed in unit of anguli, that it is the dimension of a finger of the same person rather than an arbitrary standard external to the individual. In fact, such normalized units exist for measurements of not only length but also volume and even for the measurement of time. In yoga, a unit of time has been defined which is normalized to the individual. In yoga, a mantra of time has been defined as the time taken by the individual who is asleep to complete one cycle of the breath, namely one inhalation and one exhalation. In any scientific course, it is essential to achieve precision and rigor in the Western tradition. The geometry of Euclid is considered by the paradigm of an ideal theory, and various other branches of knowledge try to emulate Euclid by setting and their knowledge on the basis of a formal axiomatic system. In contrast, in Indian tradition, an attempt was made. An attempt was made to use natural language and to refine and sharp language. This is so particularly in Sanskrit, where we find that even the most abstract and metaphysical discussions regarding grammar, mathematics, or logic are still written in natural language. In Indian knowledge system, it is the science of linguistics that occupied the central place which in the West was occupied by mathematicians. Hence, the traditional sciences have a different approach to achieving rigor. Now, according to Vippo's focus in a traditional knowledge as described above, traditional knowledge is created, originated and developed and practiced by traditional knowledge holders. The traditional culture expressions are a subset of traditional knowledge. The traditional culture expressions of folklore maybe include music, dance, art, design, names, signs, and symbols, performances, ceremonies, architectural forms, handicrafts and narratives, or many other artistic or cultural expressions. So I would like to conclude it by saying that the intrinsic value of biological diversity and ecological, genetic, social, economic, scientific, educational, cultural, recreational, and aesthetic values and its components are to be taken care properly for the better management of biological resources and biodiversity, for the welfare of human beings, for better and healthier as well as peaceful living on earth. Beside law enforcing forces and regulation of the governments, it is always better to involve the people in a participatory mode, including tribal people, farmers, ecologists, illiterate villagers for the conservation and protection of biodiversity wealth of our great nation. Awareness creation among people, school, children, students, and teachers in the colleges, universities is very important at ground level is very important to conserve the biodiversity wealth. Participatory mode of involvement of the people at ground level to acquire more knowledge about the biodiversity conservation will help to maintain and sustain the bioresources and biodiversity. The involvement of local people and their willing participations along could save the nation wealth of biodiversity. It is difficult to solve and manage and conserve the biological diversity by the state government or the central government alone. But the people of our great nation have to be aware of our natural biodiversity, wealth of our country, and they should take all the measures to conserve and protect our rich biodiversity, not only for better living of our life, of our present generation, but also for our future generation. It is very much important and it is very much needed for each and every human being to take care of our traditional knowledge and Indian knowledge system so that we can save our biodiversity for making our future and our upcoming futures better and better. Thank you.